What's up, coders? I'm Luke, an instructor and content creator here at Covalence, and I'm coming at y'all with a tutorial today about modals. I actually got asked this question from some of our students. We have a particular lab in our course where they learn about server-side development using node.js. They build an Express server, specifically a REST API called Chirper. And Chirper is kind of like the cheap knockoff of Threads or Twitter, for example. It's a simple, talking social media, whatever app. It's meant to be a fun little lab where they code out a server that deals with the CRUD operations of getting all chirps, inserting them, updating them, deleting them, etc. Again, chirp can be anything, a tweet, a thread, whatever you want to call it. And after that, they have to go and code a website where they display this information, have a form to submit them, and have the ability to delete them by clicking an X button. And the difficult part that a lot of students tend to get hung up on is, how do I make a button pop up a modal, and I fill out that modal with some contents, and for example, I can make a put or patch request to my server to save that data. That is the goal of today's tutorial. I'm going to show you all a very simple modal with minimal HTML, CSS, and a bit of JavaScript to get this sucker working that will cover those very basics. So instead of using a CSS kit or library such as SweetAlert 2, which I do love, or the Bootstrap, or Tailwind, not Tailwind, but like Daisy UI modals, for example, I want to code it from scratch to show you all the fundamentals and some things to be wary of. For example, things like accessibility and cross-scripting attacks and things like that. So we're going to be making a simple, and I do stress simple, yet fully functional modal with some inputs inside of them, and our focus will be on the core language of web HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Nothing too fancy. So we're also going to make it somewhat responsive, or at least talk about basics of responsiveness, accessibility, and sanitization and protection on it, as well as how we can make a request to a server. If you have an interest in anything I've talked about, for example, how to learn how to do server-side development, more on front-end development, or if you want my entire standalone React course, we do have a community membership here at Covalence for $25 a month. You get access to all three of those courses. When put together is our full stack development course, plus all of my extra React content. So if you have an interest in that, check the description and the link down below. You'll also get access to exclusive events such as resume building, code mentorship, and just chats with me and other people here at Covalence. And you'll obviously be in our Discord server where you can always ask questions on your development journey along with us, right? So I just realized I should probably switch to a screen where y'all can actually see the modal that we'll be coding here. Again, I did say it's very bare bones. This is not like me. Normally I include some level of styling to it, but I'm trying to keep it to a minimal today. Look at this beautiful modal right here. She pops up. She has some inputs in there. We can do first name, last name. That could be handle or username. This could be your chirp or to-do list item, or whatever you need it to be. It doesn't really matter, but notice here I can click on the darkened background. It closes the modal. The close button also closes the modal, and submit would, well, at the moment it console logs some things I was messing with, but who cares? I'll talk more about that in a minute here. This will be replaced with, hey, I'm making a request to a server that would, and then edit some content on my server, right? So that's the goal of this video, and I guess we're going to try and dive on in to see what we can get going here. So yeah. I need to close that window. I'll close it in a minute. I need to get this one going here. So we have modal previews where I had everything written so you can see what we're going to be doing, but modal code is where I'm actually going to be writing it all. So I'm going to go ahead and create my most simple possible files here. Obviously, if you're trying to follow along, you could use CodePen, Code Sandbox, or your own code editor or IDE, whatever you want. This will be all very fundamental stuff, though. This is like week one of learning anything about web development whatsoever. So style.css, and again, if you're coming here and you know nothing about this, want to know how to write this stuff, then again, check out the description and check out for a community membership link in the description below. I know how to talk, and I also don't like editing, so I like leaving in my mistakes. Plus, it makes me feel more human. So right out of the box, we're going to use an Emmet shortcut to generate this quick little scaffolding for an HTML document. We're going to call this the modal fun title of the web page here. I'm going to link my style sheet as well, so I have it available. And I will be eventually coding this thing from our JavaScript page right there. Or our JavaScript code right there will be executed and ran on this page. So I'm going to use it asynchronously at the bottom of the document body. I am going to scaffold together, I guess, I don't know, just some quick stuff. Quick old div right here. Let's put in a beautiful H1 that says I am some content on the page LMAO, because we're not confident enough to just state a sentence. We have to end it with LMAO instead of a period or something like that. We'll do a paragraph tag and throw in some lorem ipsum right there, format it, and maybe one more down below it. Again, this is just like some stuff that would be on the page. This could be a list of to-do items that you are, for example, looping through in your JavaScript code and generating this kind of card style content for it. I don't know what it would be. That would have its own delete and edit buttons inside of that, for example. So yeah. What we need to do is we need to also have at some point a button that's going to be opening the modal. And again, this could be part of this content right here. It could be standalone. It doesn't really matter. And a lot of the times, if you have like accessibility purposes, you would include IDs that match for attributes inside of HTML. So a lot of the times you'll see this, especially in any kind of online examples or documentation, where you will see IDs that match up with certain for attributes in the HTML, which I'll be worrying about right here. So we'll have this simple button here that says open modal, and that's all there really is to it for the actual content on the page. I mean, let's go ahead and get this sucker up and running. Rather than my live server, I'm just going to open it in my default browser here, which happened to be the wrong window. Over yonder, close the other one so I don't get confused. There we go. Zoom in a touch so y'all can see all this beautiful content on the page right here, this lorem ipsum stuff. Although I forget, if I'm super zoomed in and I start talking about mobile responsiveness, get in the comments down below and make fun of me if I forget to zoom out before I start talking about media queries. But yeah, this is the page contents. Again, this button could be repeated for several of these elements right here. I could throw it into the div so we can consider it part of this contents of the page, for example. It doesn't really matter. But if you're like looping through and creating these divs from your JavaScript for a list of things with the potential to edit them, this could be like, hey, the edit my contents button or something like that. Doesn't matter. Okay, that is as simple as the HTML part for the non-modal needs to be. Now, a lot of the times a modal already exists in your HTML and it's simply hidden through some CSS and potentially some JavaScript. So for screen reader accessibility, it's typically added at the bottom of the document body, meaning it's always there and possibly outside of your general render tree. So like in React, for example, everything typically appears in a root div or something like that, and modals, well, they can't appear in that root div and disappear as elements for screen, again, accessibility purposes especially. So a lot of the times you have to use a custom function from React called create portal. I have a video on that somewhere here at Covalence. And if you just want that in like a tutorial series, but if you want that as a standalone, again, get in the comments down below and let me know, and I'll happily recreate this video from a React perspective. But the idea is that we need to add our modal, if I can learn to type, somewhere inside of our HTML. And like I said, the typical place is to include it somewhere in the bottom of the body. That way it is there and simply invisible to our users until we edit some CSS via JavaScript or a button click, for example, or something like that. So the general kind of like idea for a modal is that you have like the full kind of transparent dark screen. Then you actually have the modal contents itself and whatever happens to fall within. So for example, I might make one right here that has a class of modal that I'll style from there, and I might call this my modal or something like that. It doesn't really matter. Again, you'll see this a lot online though. So I'll go ahead and add that, and this will represent that big transparent background screen and the positioning of the modal and making sure it's up top and whatnot. This is like that container of the modal, not for the actual contents of the modal, but the actual container for the whole thing. From there, I might include another div within that will actually represent my modal content, meaning what I'm going to be seeing in that little box in the middle of the screen with the transparent background behind it, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is the actual inner part of the modal where all of our content, kind of like the class name is showing us right here, is going to represent, right? And if you're wondering, modal is short for just modal windows. I didn't actually know that. I thought modal was like its specific term, but really modal windows is the correct term. But right, it's that it sits on that main window and it's, modal, right? That's why they're commonly used for feature dialogues, alerts, collecting input data, and stuff like that. So, yeah. So from there, we need to continue adding some modal content to it. So let's actually, I had that close button on the right-hand side, so I might have something like close button container that will then contain this close button, which will actually just be some fancy CSS added to this button right here. It'll be a span. That will be a ampersand, what is it, times that. This is the character represented, the Unicode, it's the character entity representing that X or kind of close button right there, rather than a traditional X. So if you're curious how to do those, that's how you can write that right there. So there's our little X button that will appear at some point. Let's code a beautiful looking form inside of here. like this, no action and no method. We're going to control the submitting of the form via JavaScript and not through default HTML. Again, this ain't going to be pretty. And again, this could be like, a class name. I don't really care to style it all that much. We'll say, I know how to type. This will be for the handle or username of somebody. So if we're editing their username, that will be what that represents right there. We'll have another one for their chirp, for example, considering this is for some students that asked me how to do this for that particular lab. I'm going to try and cater it to them. But again, this could be anything you need. In between there, let's put in an input that will be of the same kind of ID in case I need to select it. We'll say username. Who cares about class name? And then I guess we can do, in case we need it, we can do the name attribute here as well, just to play it safe in case we use it in some way with our selectors. And then again, they're inline by default, so I'll go ahead and add a quick BERT tag right there. This will be for the actual chirp's contents or body or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter all that much. It just has to be looking halfway decent right here. There we go. And then we'll have our lovely little submit button down here where we can have a type of submit with a value of like edit chirp or something like that for this particular demo, since that's the point here, right? The whole purpose is it's going to be saving some kind of value later. So again, this is the contents of our modal, what the person or individual will be seeing on the page in front of them. This will be the actual big transparent background with all the other douchey stuff added to it as well. So, by default, this will simply be appearing on the page no matter what I do. Okay, I have refresh. There we go. So there's the actual modal. As you can see, it's not super fancy as of right now. So let's go add some quick style so we can start seeing what it might look like as I mess with it and begin adding into its CSS, right? So that's what we're going to be goofing on right now. So like I said, the modal itself, it needs to default to a display of none, but I'm going to comment that out for now. That'll be the default display until that button is clicked. But should it not, we're going to add a position of fixed. We're going to have a z-index, very important to make sure it's on the top of our stack of items, right? The z-index deals with the depth of items on our page. So if things are overlapping, the HTML or the browser will know how to parse it and figure out, and when painting comes along, where it's supposed to be displayed in our face or not, right? Again, we'll make it offset from the top of the page by adding some generic amount of padding, 100 pixels. I'll take a guess. I don't really care. A left value of 0, a top value of 0, so it's aligned to the left and top corner of the page no matter what. Now, I'm going to say that remember, this is that transparent screen in the background, so no matter the size of the viewport, I want the height and width to be 100% of that viewport, because everything behind that modal content should be dimmed out in that transparent layer. If there happens to be any kind of overflow, I'll set it to auto by default. And we're also going to provide, like I said, that background color. I can do an RGB of like 0, 0, and 0 for a nice dark color. Or I might actually, hold on, I might just do RGBA here. There we go, like that. And that will give it that kind of dimmed out background, right? So that's what I'm talking about right there. See? So we can see the modal is now no longer in the general flow of our HTML page, right? All of our typical block level element rules have been overridden by position fixed, as well as doing top and left 0. But the reason it's not in the top left corner is because I added that generic amount of padding top. That green is the padding I added right there. So we now have that dimmed out background. We have the modal. The modal content itself hasn't been styled yet. I'm pointing out that the modal container is this thing you're used to seeing when modals pop up. It's that dark background that also, when clicked on, should close the modal, as well as clicking that X button should close the modal, and etc. So this is all the magic sauce that's incorporated in making sure that the background of the page is kind of hidden and z-index behind this almost pseudo-transparent layer. Sometimes they won't have this dim out action happen. Sometimes they'll simply pop up the modal with like an invisible layer on it. And this is also something you'll see Kitboga do for scammers and things like that, or what scammers might try and do by editing your CSS or HTML. So check out, shout outs to Kitboga. I love watching that guy and seeing all the crazy shenanigans he'll do with like jQuery, JavaScript, and HTML and CSS to make fake banking websites and whatnot. Yeah, so that's our modal background. Let's actually code out our modal content now. So again, this is meant to be a simple tutorial, how to make your own here. I'm trying not to overcomplicate it too much. Background color, let's do a background color. That's like beautiful, not quite white color right there. It's like a little bit down from pure that's how we technically call it in the industry here as developers. We have and width as our background colors for white and off-white. I'll add an automatic amount of margin, booyakasha, and we'll say just add some padding like in the the X and Y direction, so we don't have everything crammed against the corners of the screen. We're gonna have some padding there. Don't be afraid of some negative space to draw our user's eyes somewhere. Border 1 pixel solid. I don't know, like a couple eighths for a similar looking like dark grayer color right there. Again, doesn't matter. I don't really care about it. I'm just kind of guessing here from what I wrote previously. And we're going to say by default on large screen sizes, I have an ultra wide monitor. I'm going to set it at 50%. I probably wouldn't do this right here. You might want something more like 75 or 80% of your screen size, but I'll get into, I want to make it look obvious when I talk about mobile responsiveness. So I'm going to pick a 50% screen size for now. Because there we go. This is what our editing has done so far. Just made it look a little bit different, right? The purpose is that I want this centered on the screen. I want it to be 50% of the size, but maybe that's obviously too small on small screen sizes. So on this Pixel 5 screen size here, I probably want to have some kind of responsiveness added to it in order to make it appear a bit bigger. So we can add a comment that says responsive styles for modal. It's a good idea for newbies or experts alike. I'm really bad at it, I'm not going to lie. But I also code projects mainly for myself, so I'm the only sucker that would not benefit from having my own comments. But if you're making any kind of public content or anything facing for recruiters or interviewers or things like that, adding comments to your code will help you in the long run and make you look like a pro. So what we're going to do is write a media query here, a very simple one. We're going to say, hey, our max width of, I don't know, what's a common value, like 768 pixels for those kind of screen sizes. We're going to say if the screen size is that, as a max width of 768 or smaller, we're going to say the modal content selector will do what it currently does, except it's going to override its width to be 90 pixels, or not 90% instead of that 50% I have right above that. So this will get overridden by my new width if that screen size is smaller. And we're going to have a smaller amounts of padding because that large padding of 20 pixels doesn't need to be as pronounced on a very small screen size. We have less real estate to work with, so I'm going to add less padding overall. So that right there will show us that if I refresh here, this is what it looks like by default with my new media query. Boom. It now has less padding all around, and it has also a bigger width on a smaller screen size, right? That's the whole purpose here. Yeah, and again, like because I'm super zoomed in, I almost caught myself. I was like, why didn't the media query kick on right there? Why is it that large size? It's because I'm super zoomed in. But if I zoom out to regular levels, that's what the 50% screen size looks like right there. And that's what the 90% screen size with 90% width looks like on a mobile view compared to a desktop view. But again, I need to zoom in so y'all can actually see this so my media query isn't kicking on because the screen size is now triggering that media query right there is what we're looking at. Show, same thing. Let's go ahead and keep on coding out a few more things. I had that class, I think, for container, what did I call it? Close button container. Good thing I looked. Close button container. We'll have a display of flex, and we'll do justify content ends. So the close out button gets smacked to the right-hand side of our window. There it goes, right on the right-hand side of the window. Let's actually style the close button itself as well. I'll add a color of to it. Right there, that's a beautiful color we can add to the button. We're going to give it some crazy font size, like 30 pixels. Nothing too massive, but big enough to actually see it. And let's give it a X as bold as love. We'll do bold for the font weight right there. And you know what? Let's go add some magic, more stuff to our media query. Again, the X button doesn't, or close out button doesn't need to be nearly as large on a mobile device as it needs to be on a desktop device. So if we had a beautiful font size of 30 on the close button there in our media query, I don't know, let's just do like, this is just pointing out things you can take into consideration when it comes to mobile responsiveness and things like that. So big old X button, slightly smaller X button, right? Or yeah, again, big old X button, and then it needs to be slightly smaller on that screen size since it's not as important. There we go. It doesn't need to be as big. So yeah, again, like just some ideas, food for thought, if you will, when it comes to these modals, right? So beyond that, what else we got to do? We should probably add some style to it. We can do like close button hover state, and we could do a close button focus state. So if it is focused, we can have some We can have some custom styles there as well, like a 0 out color right there, make it dork. Remove all text decoration from it, and if this is supposed to be a button, we always got to put on our good old buddy cursor pointer on this sucker here as well. So yeah, just some desktop style additions to our little button here. We can have it fade in when we have it moused over, etc. So yeah, clearly this being clicked on or anywhere outside the modal being clicked on, we got to have some JavaScript that's going to close this sucker out. And then we're going to focus on clicking this button and logging some values. And because it refreshes the page, by the way, which is what that has happened right there. I haven't prevented the submit button from submitting the form. Default behavior is to submit the page, which I don't want it to do, but that's what it's going to be doing. So yeah, there we go. Moving on to JavaScript, we need to select several of these things. So I'll go ahead and select my modal itself and say, hey, document, please run a query selector to find the my modal in the document. And I'm pretty sure that's what I called it. Yeah, my modal. Remember, this is that darkened background screen where I can say, I might use this eventually when I have to edit its style. Because like I said, by default, it actually should be hidden. So what we're actually going to do is to that button, let's go ahead and switch to display none back in our CSS. I need to select the actual button itself. What did I call it? Yeah, my button or edit modal button or modal button. It doesn't matter what you call it, right? So we'll say my button as that selector, and we'll call this the modal btn, so we have a beautiful variable name right there. We'll say, hey, modal button, I want to assign to you an onClick that will run the following code, and I want to, that modal I've selected from the HTML, I want you to set its display, no, not computed style map, its style.display property to block code when we click on the modal button to display it. So now that that's added there, cannot set properties of null, setting on click. So clearly something did not work the way I expected it to. Let's debug it. So on click of null, nodal, that's why. Yeah, so we got that error there, and I'm all about leaving errors in and making them into learning opportunities. Cannot set properties of null setting on click. So it says setting on click properties of null. That means that whatever to the left of the on click is coming up null. Why is this null? It's a variable. What is this happening here? That means the selector is not selecting an element from the HTML successfully. We get a null value, and we can't add an onClick to a null value, which is a value in JavaScript. But that's because I typoed, get in the comments if you saw it, my selector right there. So let's try that again. There's no error. Open the modal, and voila, we have it opened. Now, the opposite needs to happen when it comes to clicking the X and background button. So I will say, let's get that close button. So const close span, so technically it's not a button, so I'm going to be very cognizant about calling it a name that makes sense right there, and we'll call it the close button class, which is fine, whatever. I can add an ID to it later if I wanted to, but yeah, this will, and because we're doing query selector and not selector all, this should only select the singular class, the first class it finds a close button, which should just be that close button itself. Because the close span button is what should have also assigned to it an onClick that will run the following function code that will also just simply toggle the modal, quote unquote, back off by simply toggling it back to a CSS property of hidden right there. So quick refresh, fire, looks great. Close doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Oh my goodness. This is not working well, folks. Modal style display hidden. Oh, it's not hidden. It's none. That's what the value is. Hashtag professionalism, more like. There we go. Now, we also want the page to be closing the modal as well. If I click on that dark background, so I'll add a click listener to the window itself to say, hey, if a user clicks anywhere on the window, I would like the following code to run. If the event.target is the modal, right? So if the event target right there, there we go. If the event target, meaning where my mouse click happens to be that modal background, that transparent-ish, like darkened, translucent, that's the word I'm looking for, translucent screen. If that happens to be event target, it is time to hide that modal back to display none, not hidden loop, you doofus. There we go. Got our code running there. So now hopefully I can open the modal and close it by clicking anywhere on event target modal, and beautiful. She has closed out just fine. That's what I'm talking about. So yeah, from here I could also say const form button equals hey document, run a query selector to find that form button inside of my, yeah, this one right here, my lovely little form button right here that I'm going to have to select and do something with. So I might just give it like a quick ID to make my life easy and call it form button or something like that. That's my ID for it. We'll run a query selector to find that ID right there as well. Let's add a quick click listener to it as well. So we're going to say, now, you know, you've seen me doing on-click events right here. You could also see me do add event listener. Add event listener has the ability to propagate stuff with the event object and do some other cool stuff with it. I can chain on multiple events using add event listener, whereas this on-click assignment function is a one and done, meaning if I write this code more than once, it will simply reassign an on-click function to it uniquely every time, whereas document add event listener to my element, or rather form button to add event listener, I can chain on multiple click events to the same element if I wanted to. So let's go ahead and check that out. I could say my form button add event listener, what type I want to click event listener. In this case, to show you all the other syntax we could choose to do as well, let's capture the event for use in our code. Because this is a submit button inside of a submit form, I'm going to choose to prevent the default behavior of the form doing what it does, which is submit the form and refresh our page. And instead, I would like to try and console log some values. So I can say const username is event.target.elements of, I believe, username right there, and we can say the value of that input. Same thing for this one, which was, I think I called it the chirp or content or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Right there for ourselves, right? So let's see if we can console log those values of username and chirp right inside of here, inside of this click event listener. So yeah, that's what we got going on. Let's go see what happens. I should refresh the page too, shouldn't I? So username, Luke, chirp. Modals are fun. Very, relevant for this video. Okay, so let's see what happened here. Event.target.elements should be what I was looking for right here, but clearly I missed something here. That's interesting. Let's see what happened there. Well, let's console log. I'm going to comment these 3 bits of code out because, yeah, you're wondering, hey, Luke, why didn't you show off what you could do with what you've been doing by running query selectors and things like that? I actually discovered this not too long ago just by messing with code and looking through things online as answers, and it didn't quite tell me why it wasn't working. What am I missing here, folks? Event dot, oh my goodness, event.target.elements is what I missed on the console log. So classic mistake right there, classic blunder, which is still not working the way I expected it to. Why the heck not? That's because it's the button click event and not elements of the form, Luke, you dummy. That's why. Okay, so I selected the button. The button doesn't have any child elements. It is a simple button inside this form itself. Had I selected instead the my form ID is what I should have done. If I select that ID as my form and go from making it a click event on a button to a form submit event, this is what I meant to do. Goodness me, oh my. Classic. All right. This happens to be in the. I've been coding for 6 years and I still do dumb mistakes. So event.target.elements should give us the context of whatever the form submit is, which there we go. It gives us the form elements that we are looking at inside of our code. So that was the mistake I used right there. So there's my username input that I can mess with, and there's my chirp input I can mess with, which so means if I put these back in, we should be good to go. So my code was correct for the function, but my event was incorrect. I did that on purpose to make a lesson out of this video. That's what I did, right, y'all? So let's try that again. Username, Luke. Man, I suck as the chirp content, and there we go. There is a console log of a JavaScript object that may be what you need to send to your server as a request body as JSON data. Meaning I can take this object and ask it to be stringified by our handy-dandy function, json.stringify. With that example I have right there, blah, 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 blah. There's our beautifully stringified data that now we can do whatever we want to do with it. So for example, I can say make a fetch request to some non-existent API endpoint. So this would be like API chirps if we had that. We can have a method of put or patch. We can have additional headers set to inform our server. We have an incoming data type of content type application /JSON. After that, I can include this console log value, this JSON stringify, as the body of this request, like that. And then after this fetch request resolves, I can say if then if res.ok fires off as true, then I could ask it, for example, to close our modal, right? So I could simply go back to having modal display none because it successfully saved that data. But I don't have a server running for this example, so this is going to be a non-working example for now where I have this kind of request that when it resolves, then I want it to close the modal, right? And this will make sure that happens. Make this edit request, and you probably have like the ID of the chirp as well if you had this like in a template literal, or you can concatenate it or whatever you need to do. So you'd also have to have the chirp's ID, for example, if this was that lab in our course you were solving. But yeah, this is how you could, for example, make an edit request to an API endpoint, send off the data from those fields that a user types into, which if this is how I got the values, you could also assign them values from something else you've selected inside of your code. So if you have the contents of something you're looping through, you can say, hey, fill in the inputs with the values of the thing I'm editing from, or like the contents of the card I'm editing from, for example. And you'd make this request, and if it gets a response that is a good status code response, we can simply then hide the modal because we have successfully saved the page. We could also refresh the page or now edit the DOM contents to either refresh page or edit DOM content of what we edit, because now that will keep in sync with whatever our server has stored on the back end. We can make the website reflect what is now safely stored back there only when the response comes back as okay. So yeah, that about sums up this video tutorial here. This went way longer than I wanted to, and I didn't cover all the points I wanted to, but you know what? I did say this is supposed to be simple. So yeah, if you want more in-depth stuff on here, I could show you some things like ARIA labels. I could show you how to make this equivalent in React, which is not exactly the same way. It's very similar. It follows all the same rules. I could show you all some additions on like input sanitization to make sure we don't get hit by cross-scripting attacks, some simple regex or remove script tags, for example, here, so I can't do stuff like this, and try seeing if I can inject code to my inputs, for example, and things like that. But you know, I think I've covered enough for this particular video. The point was to code a simple modal that can make edit requests to a server that some students have asked me for, and hopefully this will help future students from our courses, which again, if you're interested, check those comments. Check the description for a link to our community membership down below if you want to learn how to code the server or have this or understand what the fetch request is going to your server and what this means for our code in the bigger scheme of things. So yeah, as always, please like this video, comment on this video about anything further you want me to explore, or even a thanks for saying, hey, this covered some of the fundamentals pretty well, or you sucked at it and you should have covered these things. I can make an addendum video that covers more advanced stuff. But again, like, it's a fine line trying to find out how much do I add and how much do I not talk about, so this is not an hour and a half long. So yeah, subscribe to the Covalence channel for more tutorials. I like reading the comments in our community members Discord and in the YouTube comment section for making additional YouTube videos. I'm happy to do that. This is Luke signing off.